Welcome to another episode of the Weekly Crypto Check-In, recorded on October the 30th, 2024. I'm your host, Robert Swarthout, and I'm joined by my co-host, Andres Sandate. How's it going, Andres?
Counting down to election. I mean, I'm hoping 1 week from today, Robert, we'll have a winner, and we can start moving on to discussing crypto regulation and who's going to run the SEC.
Yes.
But until then, we've got more headlines. I'm good.
We have Halloween and the election, and then
Oh
so we won't be recording next week because I won't be able to make that time that we normally record. So it'll be 2 weeks from now we'll do our next one. But it's I hope that I don't have to stay up terribly late.
Right.
And we get results quickly like any sort of civilized country.
Yeah, an atypical lead into the show. I'm doing good. This week has been kind of nuts. My wife is on a business trip, so I'm day 3 so far. There haven't been any fire alarms or police sirens or anything with the kids running around, here in Smyrna. But we're doing good. It's been it's been a kind of an interesting few days with, like, obviously anybody paying attention to the news cycle with what's going on with the election.
Yep.
We've seen some interesting headlines coming out, obviously today with the GDP numbers, and I'm speaking at an event tonight. So I've been preparing some, I want to say speech remarks, but I've been preparing some remarks, on alternative investments. So it's been a busy week.
Awesome. Well, let's get rolling here. So, we seem to always be talking about either the SEC or the Bitcoin ETFs, and we're not going to let the listeners down today. We're going to at least talk about those two things. But it's just continued perspective on kind of how well these have performed, specifically the Bitcoin ones. The Ethereum ones have been less strong, but of the 575 ETFs that have launched in 2024 to date, 14 of the top 30 are either Bitcoin or Ethereum.
Yeah.
Or said slightly differently, 6 of the top 10 are all crypto, and 5 of those top 10 are Bitcoin. It's in the top 4 are only Bitcoin. So it's just amazing. In a market that has done out, the broader market has done well this year. So it's not like somehow crypto is soaking up from everyone else. They're fighting for the same dollars in a lot of sense. So
we're going to talk about one of the other top 6 names, which is the Russell 2000. It turns out that of the top 6, 4 are Bitcoin, Ethereum related. 5 and 6 are, one's a ultra short muni bond ETF, so probably not something most people can get their head around even. But the other one is the Global X Russell 2000 ETF, which is the index on small caps. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But yeah, pretty interesting. It really makes me wonder about all these ETF analysts out there, like how much they've had to sort of recalibrate their analysis around this new asset class to stay relevant, right? To get clicks, to get advertising, to get headlines, because a year ago this whole thing didn't exist in ETFs, and now all of a sudden 4 of the top 30 are all Bitcoin, Ethereum related. So how fast things can change.
Well, and shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but like just the news cycle is so fast, and it you can't print it and put it in a paper and be fresh in the morning. It's got to be within 15 minutes online somewhere, and then it's old already. So it's crazy to see the news move so quickly.
Yeah.
So kind of on the topic of news, we've touched on the different there's poly market and there's different betting markets specifically around this election cycle we're in, and there's other things you can bet on in those markets. But I believe we touched on the topic of is outside money, so outside money being outside the U.S., non-U.S. citizens influencing any of these quote unquote polls where people are betting whether it's a Trump win or Harris win. And there's a couple that are specifically only allowed to be U.S., assuming identity is done correctly and all that stuff.
Sure.
And basically, it was proven out. This gentleman, Jim Bianco, I went through and just kind of talked about it. It was pretty fascinating to kind of see that, like, because I had wondered myself, and I don't know enough to know, if it's good or bad. But he proved out that the betting markets that are domestic and the ones international are basically in line with each other, and they're proving to be statistically within variations he would expect. So interesting.
Well, yeah, and like we were talking about before we went live, like Bianco, Jim Bianco, who you're referring to, he's well known at least in investing circles for the research he's done. He's been at this space, at this game, not just crypto, not just betting markets, but just overall like macro research for decades. So, who knows? Maybe Jim Grant is next. Maybe one of these other more traditional TradFi people or research gurus comes out and starts to opine on the space. I think one of the big takeaways is just this convergence we're continuing to see, right, between digital assets, crypto, blockchain, and traditional finance. I think, when we look back in, 5 years to today, I think we'll say, gosh, that's all that was going on. So I think the more I see of these headlines, the more it's like you can sort of ignore it and say that's all irrelevant. But I think that that's a little bit like sort of sticking your head in the sand, and pretending like it doesn't exist, because it does, and it's real, and there's a lot of capital flowing. So we'll see. It's pretty interesting. The last big election, we talked about Russia influence and China influence and hackers. This year, we're talking about election betting markets influence. It's kind of, phenomenon.
Admittedly, Americans like to gamble, right? I mean, there's the sports betting, which has become huge.
Oh gosh, yeah.
5 years ago, you would have never thought to see that you would see betting odds on a live broadcast on ESPN or ABC.
Sure.
Now they are injecting it whenever they can, because they found a way legally to make money with it. So, I just find it fascinating. I was reading something recently about how, you hear about all these pollsters around the election. You got to take those with a grain of salt, because who knows if they're accurate. But you start to get into these bigger markets, especially for people putting money on the line, and they appear to be, so far, to be accurate, more accurate than, say, the traditional polls. So are we seeing a sea change here in how election polls are going to be done in the future? What I find fascinating, and we're not there yet, is once you have an identity on the blockchain in a way that is safe and all that stuff, I would hope, you really could have true polls. It doesn't even have to be with dollars. You can have, or you could be with betting, or it doesn't have to be. And it's much more provable, but we're
transparent. Yeah,
we're far away from transparent elections in this country at this point. So who knows if we'll make that leap anytime soon. So,
well, I think it's I think the final comment I would make is just how like you said this, but just the amount of now legalized betting or gambling, the amount of especially that under 30 cohort, they're digital natives, right? They're much more comfortable with technology. And have said over and over in just about every poll that they intend to be big users and adopters and are of digital assets. So this is just another example of how it's moving into more quote unquote mainstream areas of our life, like elections.
Yep. And hopefully we can actually use this technology in an election. In my opinion, at least, I get how some people don't like it, but I would love to see blockchain used in an election. I think it would clean up some of the mess that we might have. So our next topic, we kind of alluded to it in the beginning. So the Russell 2000 in Bitcoin. When I saw this tweet, Blockchain Backer is a technical analyst that does crypto stuff, among others. He has a huge following on YouTube. And when he put this chart up, I was blown away, like how similar the Russell 2000's performance on a daily basis since basically call it early July until now compared to Bitcoin. It looked like he just literally copied the same line and changed the color on it.
Right.
Like so similar.
We should pull the chart up. When we get fancier with our technology, we'll have a live look in like an analyst, or somebody behind the scenes, a studio analyst pulls it up for us. But if you go to if you go to his handle on Twitter,
BC Backer on Twitter.
The title of his tweet is "Birds of a Feather," right? And it's like you said, it's everything's moving in sync. At least back to July. I
mean, a lot of volatility. I mean, both of them, obviously, because they're functioning the same line, but Bitcoin is effectively touching an all-time high right now. It's crazy to see that basically the news has not covered it. I mean, yesterday Bitcoin was at functionally an all-time high. Today it's pulled back a little bit at 71,000 and change.
Okay.
But
so we crossed 70 this week.
It was up to 73. And had a little bit of a run basically Monday, Tuesday, but it's but it's not in the news cycle. And admittedly, I think obviously the election is just sucking all the air out of the room right now. So
right. Well, one thing, the Russell 2000, this is the small cap index. So for those out there who are paying attention to the equity markets or the stock market, it's like 2000, publicly traded companies, obviously key publicly traded. So obviously a lot more than 2,000 out there. Sure. But the 2,000 publicly traded companies that make up the Russell 2000, if you look at what they call the periodic table of investment returns, which is a fancy chart that gets put out, it's sort of like that chemistry periodic table that we used to get way back in high school.
Yeah.
I didn't take chemistry probably till high school, so you probably took it in middle school. But point being, it shows the returns of 15 or 20 asset classes over decades, and in some cases going back hundreds of years, right? And you know what the number one performer is going back to the 20s to today, over a long period of time? Granted, small cap stocks.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and things revert to the mean and the average, return over that long period of time. Now, granted, the financial advisor in me says you got to diversify. You should,
sure,
but that goes to the point of the volatility, right? Some years the Russell has been down 50%.
Yeah.
Other years it's up 75%. So we see a lot of those parallels in crypto, right? Particularly here in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and I mean, admittedly, that also mirrors crypto. I know the Russell struggled as of late, and crypto it's been up. Bitcoin's up 60% for the year, but that is not the whole story. It's Bitcoin than everybody else, and everybody else has not had as great of a year to date.
Right. So yeah, interesting. That's a cool chart. We'll have to find a way to share that with listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next is just an update. We recorded last Wednesday, then I think on Thursday some more news came out. But basically the SEC via Ripple case, the SEC said it was appealing. Ripple said they were cross appealing. So the SEC filed an extension asking the court to be able to basically give it a full document by January the 15th. That's rather extended. I think it was a month extended, if I'm not mistaken. It's just interesting timing. There may be nothing behind it, but it's also 5 days before an inauguration of whoever the next president is. And, certainly if Trump gets elected, there's a new chair of the SEC. Potentially, even if Kamala gets elected, there is. And it's an interesting gift to give the next chair.
Right.
So there's that piece of it. Ripple Cross in their cross appeal. They did bring up that they plan to, that they are appealing the idea that there doesn't have to be a physical contract for there to be an investment contract, air quotes there. That's part of the Howey test. The SEC kind of fought around that. So they're bringing that back up, and they're also bringing up the part that they never really fought over, and it didn't get ruled on by the judge, but the fair notice defense. Like if Ripple was acting in good faith, its executives thought they were following the law, how could they be held guilty for something that there was no clarity on? Is basically the I guess the short way of saying that. It sounds like that's a pretty strong argument, especially if it made it to the Supreme Court. They tend to be following that kind of line of thinking these days, from everything that I've read from other attorneys. So, we got a ways to go. I hope that some level heads enter the room, the SEC in January or February, whenever the Senate kind of gets around to confirming the next chair and the chairman or chairwoman, and we can have some civil discourse and get this thing over with. So.
Yeah. Well, this didn't make our headlines, but it's worth noting this week out in Las Vegas is the annual Money 2020 show, which is a big financial technology conference that attracts, lots of big financial technology companies. Do you know who the Fireside Chat was keynote this week?
Oh, I'm going to guess Gensler, but I have no idea.
It sure was. It was Chairman Gary Gensler. Now, he did that from the confines of what appeared to be his living room or a home studio.
Yes.
And he talked a lot about industry innovation and the importance of trying to keep pace, but also embracing technology, and obviously to a crowd of technologists and folks in financial technology that was probably encouraging. But he did get a question from the interviewer about the consideration of what happens, in the event of a, outcome of a Trump win.
Right.
Will you be replaced? Are you concerned about being, let go? And he
Yeah.
said calmly, I sleep well at night. We wake up every day focusing on helping and protecting individual investors. So I was hoping selfishly, like we might hear something about the industry, about crypto, and but he took the money. He took the money line and just said, "Look, this is a volatile topic. It's a obviously really hot button topic of crypto, and the time of that question. I don't know if they were going to get anything if they asked, but they did ask. So,
well, I can tell you, he got that same question on CNBC Asia earlier last week.
Okay.
And it sounds like this time he did a much better job answering it, because she literally goes, the lady that was interviewing him goes, if Trump gets elected, he said that he would fire you day one. Would you like to respond to that? And his answer was, you can go on to your next question. So,
yeah.
So again, I guess polite of sorts, but like the way that you described his answer was much better than that.
Yeah, he did 40 minutes. So obviously for for Money 2020 to get somebody like him who's constantly in the news with the SEC was a pretty big get. So I doubt he gets a speaking fee though. So
yeah. Cool. Well.
All right, this next one caught my attention because you said Microsoft and hedge fund and Bitcoin all in one sentence, and I said, "Sign me up. Let's talk about this one."
Yeah. So this also caught my attention when I first saw it. So Microsoft is going to put it up to vote for their shareholders whether the company should invest in Bitcoin. I think it's the right thing to do from
a corporate governance standpoint.
From a corporate governance, yes, this is being done correctly. I'm not sure that I've ever thought of Microsoft in the light of, are they a hedge fund? And obviously this is maybe a gray area to describe here, but like, it just kind of blows my mind. They obviously have cash on hand. They're trying to figure out something to do with it. And I'm not sure that you wouldn't think that they're going to invest enough in Bitcoin to be meaningful against their balance sheet, but who knows? Maybe they have ambitions to really move into it hard. I don't know. You have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do, because obviously they've got, I'm just going to put a number out there, in the hundreds of billions in cash on the balance sheet. I don't know what the actual number is. We could pull that up, but they have this gigantic amount of cash sitting on the balance sheet. They're earning, very small amount, but it's in cash. It reminds me of the decision that CalPERS made. What's the number?
I'll interrupt you real quick. 75 billion as of the end of June.
75 billion. So I was
relatively small number, I guess.
Yeah, I was off by 25 billion.
Yeah.
They have made some monster purchases though.
Yes,
I don't know how much in cash and stock, but they bought some pretty big competitors or bolt-ons recently in the last 2 or 3 years. What I was going to say is this reminds me of when CalPERS, the gigantic pension fund in California, the California Public and Pension Employee Retirement System, decided to pull out of hedge funds. And a lot of people in alternatives took note of that, and it made a lot of headlines for a couple of weeks, led to a lot of interviews and a lot of people wondering, are hedge funds dead? And their take was, for it to make a meaningful impact in our program relative to the amount of money that we would have allocated, it just didn't make sense. Like we could go in other places. I think hedge funds were coming off a pretty abysmal performance. I don't know the specific managers and strategies they were in, but their takeaway was it just wasn't worth all the hassle. So I really wonder if they're making this decision to go to the shareholders and ask, because whether it's lawsuits or is there enough of a figure that actually moves the needle? Now, here's what will happen: is I guarantee you a whole bunch of other corporate treasurers, CFOs and otherwise, are getting that call from their board and saying, "What are we doing? Are we even looking at this or not?" Right? So,
and that's a great segue to our next topic, actually. So, Emory University, based here in Atlanta, so this is a bit of hometown news, is the first endowment to buy into Bitcoin. They bought like $16 million of Bitcoin through an ETF. I should be clear.
Sure.
But it's I was surprised it took a university this long. It certainly won't be the last. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, Emory has a good size endowment. I think my recollection was that it was close to 10 billion. We could probably
Um,
again look that number up,
yep,
but
11. Yep, just over
yeah,
11.
10, 11 billion. So yeah, I mean, a sizable investment, but
Mhm.
if you say 10% of that number, it's it's not a huge amount from a percentage standpoint, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and it may be that they're going to buy quarterly at that amount. Well, I guess time will tell.
time will tell.
But it's to start buying now. Either they feel like they're about to make a really good trade, and generally endowments are not in the trading business, but you could see there being some um, taking of gains if it really starts to run. But again,
Yeah.
it's not a meaningful number for them. So I guess the news headline is the first university has got it in. We talked about some of the state pensions up in Wisconsin that did that back in May.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's 1.5%, right? Like it's
yeah.
a pretty small amount.
Mm-hmm.
It's less than 1%. So
it's 1/10 of
yeah, it's but it is of note because they are a large private endowment. They are, they got to be in the top 30 endowments here in the US anyway, in terms of size. They have a healthy allocation to alternatives. Very smart, sophisticated CIO and staff. So I'm curious how much research, analysis, and diligence went into the decision. But
right. And to think
you'd have to be on the board of trustees to really know that. But it's kind of curious.
Yeah, I mean, props to them for being forward thinking potentially in this case. I mean, generally these boards are made up of older people, right? Like, so crypto doesn't skew that way. So they're potentially definitely reaching if it truly was made up that way. I don't know what the makeup of Emory's board is, but it's
yeah, and it's also, the question is, does the board get to weigh in? So like in a public plan, a lot of times you'd have an investment staff.
Sure.
They're making recommendations to the board. The board is ultimately voting. A lot of times in some of these private foundations, endowments, etc., it's the investment staff has the discretion, right, to invest and allocate, and don't necessarily have to go to a board. It'd be interesting to know how the process kind of played out there. But yeah, nevertheless, like local and certainly right in the sweet spot of what we're reporting. So that's a good pickup.
I forget the gentleman's name. I've met him a few times at some of those events that you run here in town.
Yeah.
From Emory's. Next time I see him, I'll have to ask him. I'd be curious.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Robert, this last headline, Mr. Beast. My kids don't probably turn into this show yet. But when Mr. Beast makes its way on YouTube, I always have to do a double take because it's fascinating what these creators, he's a big YouTube creator, big social media presence,
the biggest YouTube following period.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, like the empires that they've created. And I'm always constantly pushing my kids off of YouTube. They tend to be, the boys are they're 10 and 8, so they tend to be attracted to these influencers who are doing like wacky, zany, crazy like challenges. And Mr. Beast is probably one of the leaders, if not the leader of that. Coming up with all these wild things, like, can you adopt out 500 dogs in a weekend, right? Or can you put a couple in a random like glass cube and see if they can like live together for a week? It's just some crazy stuff. But tell us about this headline, because it caught it caught me off guard. I didn't see it. I know he's at the top of the food chain, but certainly somebody trying to probably take him down, or what?
I don't know exactly the motives, but I can tell you, investigation I need to define here. This is not a federal investigation of any kind at this point. This is purely the community, basically on Twitter, making these kind of, or X. I keep calling it Twitter. It's always going to be Twitter to me. Doing some investigation, and the way that they came about this, and this just shows that like once you put something online, it potentially could be years later before it becomes meaningful, but all of a sudden it really kind of starts to be impactful. So in goodness, I don't see the date. Oh, it's me in 2021. Mr. Beast via his Twitter account posted that he had bought an NFT on Ethereum that was worth basically $100,000.
Okay.
Everything on a blockchain being public, no one think much of it. He's like, I just bought this one, blah, blah, blah. They have then taken that wallet address that did that and kind of traced back the funds. They call this chain analysis. It's a company that does this, but it's really just linking things together and watching flows of stuff because it's public, but there's not typically names attached to stuff. Well, they did that. And in this case, they have found potentially what looks like a scheme where he will promote a token via his platform of some kind, whether that's Twitter or YouTube or whatever. And then at some point thereafter, those tokens are being held, they get sold out and make some money.
After there's assuming,
right.
You know, there are people go out and buy them and say, oh, Mr. Beast is in those. Maybe I should be in those. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you know, they allege.
And the SEC did come down on some of these celebrities who were in, if you will, you call them pump and dump, you know, in the penny stock terminology, like they got well-known celebrities to sort of back and promote some of these tokens that ended up going to zero.
Right.
And
yeah, so they allege in this case that there's $23 million in total profits. So it's a lot of money, but to Mr. Beast, it's kind of like, if he really did this, this could actually turn into something if the SEC decided to care about this. The $23 million was not worth it. Like, because it's going to, potentially the house of cards starts falling apart here. So I don't know. This is early. This literally came out today. So it's not terribly tons of news around it yet, but they have definitely been doing their homework, you can tell. So I guess the point is, if you're going to put something online, make sure you want it to always be there and not bite you in the butt.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you about more of a technical question, like with wallets. So if somebody goes out and sets up a crypto wallet and makes does transactions in that digital wallet, that crypto wallet as they call it, is there any anonymity in that crypto wallet? Or can it always be traced back to like an IP address or a legal entity or an owner of the wallet?
Generally, there's no identity of any kind attached, no IP address, no nothing. Typically, how this stuff, like we just talked about, come about is either somebody, they call them doxing. So it basically means that either somebody does it to you or you do it yourself. You post about something that effectively ties an identity to that address or that wallet address.
Okay.
So there's other ways for wallets to get funds in. You can go create, say, an Ethereum wallet right now. It has nothing attached to it, no funds in it. You need to fund that wallet to do things. So you might go to Coinbase and send some Ethereum to it, or you might go from another wallet that you have and send stuff to it. So initially to the public, there's no connection. They don't know it's you. But if there was a criminal investigation, they obviously can go to Coinbase and say, let us know who owns this. Tell us about this transaction. And again, there's multiple companies that try to help around this stuff, but chain analysis is, I think, the biggest, and there's like 2 or 3 others that really help law enforcement kind of decipher this this gigantic web, because there's all sorts of different things. You don't necessarily have to get into it today, but this whole tornado cash thing that happened roughly 1.5 years ago, where a software developer made a system where you would send Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever into this thing. You can think of it as a washing machine, and it spun it around, blended it up. A whole bunch of people did this together. Then you would basically get your funds out the other side, and you're basically trying to break that chain of identity. So you wonder, like, who in their right mind that is doing good things and not trying to do bad things would want to use that. But there's very many people in the blockchain community that is purely want to stand by the ideals of blockchain and should be anonymous, and I should be able to do what I want with my money. The problem is you have criminals that decide that tornado cash is a really good idea and jump in on it. So,
well, when you said doxing, I thought I've heard of this in somewhat of a different context, not crypto related. So I pulled it up as you were talking and showing my age here, but like it's derived from the term dropping docs or documents. Doxing is a form of cyberbullying that uses sensitive or secret information, statements, or records for the harassment, exposure, financial harm, or other exploitation of targeted individuals. So I've heard about, like these pranks people play where they like send the SWAT team to someone's house. Right. And then some terrible things have happened as a result.
People have died.
I mean, it's like, so obviously as our lives become more digital, as there's more and more transactions and activities, I guess the public services announcement is, protect your identity, be sensitive about where you share information. Be thoughtful about who the counterparties are and the transactions, who's on the other side, because there is a lot of this stuff happening out there. In terms of exploitation.
100%. So memorize that and repeat it every morning, and you'll be good. So
yeah. All right. So next week, no show.
No show.
Okay.
We will catch back
Resume.
up the week after. So
Yeah, and we'll maybe have a newly elected president.
I hope
and
so.
We'll see. Should be
And
interesting.
drawn out ballot counting is not my favorite form of entertainment. So awesome. Well, thanks for joining us in this episode of the Weekly Crypto Check-In. If you want to stay updated on future episodes, you can find us in any podcast player by searching Teton Crypto Capital or the Weekly Crypto Check-In. Take care.